All right, guys, welcome back to the Cliffhanger Podcast. I'm going to talk about myself for a little while. This is just going to be me telling you guys a little more details about what it was like growing up. And we'll do this in little excerpts here and there. So, when I was born, it was January 27th, 1989. I was born in Homestead Air Force Base, Florida. The day I was born, my oldest sister tried to OD by taking a couple handfuls of medications and ended up having to go to the hospital to get her stomach pumped. So as you can imagine, the things in my household were quite interesting at the time of me coming into the world. No longer than my first birthday, my mother and father got a divorce. The divorce was pretty rough, and my mom was hurt and angry at him for many years, which made my childhood pretty interesting because she didn't hide any of that from me, nor did she keep any of it from me. As a matter of fact, I was kind of used as a tool in a lot of ways to get back at him and whatnot. It is what it is. But yeah, my mom remarried, though shortly after she married my stepfather, who they're still together. And years later, when I was 12 or 13, they had my little brother. So I have a half brother with them. And then I have the two older sisters. Like I mentioned the oldest one, but she's in her 40s. My second sister's in her late 30s. I'm in my 30s. No, I'm sorry. Wow. My oldest sister's in her 50s. My other sister's in her 40s. I'm in my 30s, and my little brother is in his 20s. So we're all 10 years apart. My mom did a good job at keeping us kind of apart. Like I said, when I grew up, my sister pulled that stunt. Not when I grew up. When I was born, my sister pulled that stunt and then was out of the house shortly afterwards. And my other sister was already out of the house living with her father. So I grew up pretty much just with my mom and my stepdad throughout the year. Granted, they all were active duty military, so one by one, they would get stationed far away. My biological father was the first one to retire from the military. He got medically discharged. Then my mother after that, years later, and then my stepfather finally. But throughout my childhood, my mom was stationed in Pohnpei and in a few other places, 9 months at one point, 6 months at another. So, I was very young and my mother was gone for a very long time, and I missed her very much. I didn't quite understand why she had to be gone for work for so long, and it was pretty hard on me. Granted, me and my stepdad would just order pizzas pretty much every day, and we would get, like all the different vegetables on the pizza because that's how we got our vegetables in, of course. And we just literally ate pizza every day and played Mario Brothers on the Super Nintendo. So it was fun, but at the same time, like I mentioned, I just deeply missed and longed for my mother and really wanted her to be near me, and she wasn't. At the same time this was going on, I missed my biological father dearly. I would only get to see him about once a year, sometimes twice if I was lucky. But a lot of times when we would have these planned visitations months and months in advance, as time would tick down, I would get very excited. Like, it was its own Christmas getting to see my dad. And he lived, a state or two away. So it was like this whole ordeal, this whole drive, meeting, at this meeting point and going from there. But I really looked forward to it. And so many times in my childhood, right before, like the week and a half, 2 weeks before, my dad would come to visit me, something would happen. And he would call and say he had work or whatever, and we had to do it another time, and it would just absolutely devastate me. I would spend just nights in my room crying, just upset, not wondering why my dad didn't want to see me, why I wasn't important enough and stuff. So these things were pretty difficult for me. I didn't ever have like a solid family unit at the house. There was no stability when it came to living in a town and growing up in a location or having both parents actively at the house there for you. There was always somebody gone, something happening, or me moving. And it was rough. I'm sure there are much worse things out there, of course, but for me, I wanted something more, and I longed for it. And still to this day, I find myself searching in ways for certain things that I felt denied as a child. But as I got older, also being a military brat, growing up on base, going around, it was required if your parents were divorced that you see a psychologist or psychiatrist, that you go speak to somebody and so on. And back in the early 90s, when this all was going down, diagnosing children with ADD, ADHD, bipolar disorder and stuff was, just a flick of a hat. The kid was a little hyper, he acted out, whatever. He had a little bit of trouble paying attention in these type of classes in public school systems and so on. They would medicate the shit out of you. So I was one of those children. So much so that my entire development, from adolescence through puberty, I was very heavily medicated. And I'll just bust out some of the diagnosis that I was given at a very young age. So, to start, I was diagnosed with ADHD and ADD, of course, as many can tell. I was diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder, which is an interesting one. And I was diagnosed with manic depressive and bipolar. So, all of these things, they tried to tell me at the age of 5 or 6 and just medicate the hell out of me. So I went through that for years, and I got to a point where I was nearing puberty. Mind you, I was moving to new schools twice, 3 times a year, always a new kid bouncing around, not really ever fitting in, having to take medicine in the morning and, leave after lunch and go to the school nurse and take more pills and, so on. It was a lot. It was just a lot. And I wanted to get to know my dad. I was nearing puberty. I was becoming a man, and I wanted this male influence. My stepfather at the time was still either active in the military or he was retired, and he was driving a tractor trailer, and he was gone for, weeks at a time again. It was just me and my mother. And as my mom retired from the Air Force, she withdrew in a way of coping with her post-traumatic stress from the Gulf War and the other things that happened to her. Being a woman in the military at the time she was in, my mom experienced some pretty brutal things that she shared with me over the years. And during my mom coping with all of that, she was utterly withdrawn and absent. She found video games, and she would play video games from morning to night and pretty much completely be consumed in them. And I would be non-existent. So the only time I got to really hang out with her is if I just kind of sat around her while she was playing and watched her play while she watched soap operas and, Bold and the Beautiful and the Young and the Restless. It was torture growing up, absolute torture. But that was just, what I had. So I built up this courage to go up to my mom and tell her, Mom, I want to go move in with Dad. I want to get to know him. I really, I want to just get to know my dad and see what it's like over there. Thinking my mom would just be able to be like, okay, it makes sense. Sure, go move in with your dad for a little while. But no, it was a complete and utter terrifying opposite reaction that I never expected the first time. But my mom immediately just went hysterical. She broke down crying. It was this whole thing of my son doesn't love me. My son wants to leave me. I'm not a good mom. Blah, blah. And she just lost her shit. And being, a mama's boy, if you will, being somebody who deeply cared about their mother and never wanted to hurt them, when I got this reaction from her realizing that my words did that to my mom, whether it was, elevated as an act or not, whatever it was, in that moment, all I knew is I really hurt my mom and I instantly regretted it. And even though I really wanted to get to know my dad, I didn't want to hurt my mom. So I retracted my statement. Mom, I'm just kidding. I don't want to move with Dad. I love you. You're an amazing mom. Of course I love you. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sorry. And I retracted, and weeks went by and I still had that same urge, man. Still really wanted to go get to know my dad. I wanted that male influence, that figure. I wanted, that connection with my father. And I built up the courage time and time again, man. And I went up to my mom and asked her, and each time it was the same reaction, just a little different. And each time I'd last a little bit longer, and then I would just finally break down. And this went on so many times, I can't even count, over about 1.5 years or so. And then I finally was able to move in with my dad, stepmom. My dad looked at me and he says, no son of mine needs to be on this medication. And he took me off everything. Granted, when he did that, I was fucking nervous as hell because I was told my entire childhood I needed it, that it was something I had to be on, or, I couldn't function, blah, blah, blah. So my dad strips me of this immediately. And I'm terrified at first, but then I kind of acclimate and balance out really quickly and realize that I just needed a little bit of structure and attention and attentiveness. I didn't need to be just heavily medicated and shunned, which was unfortunately what was happening in the other household, and my dad also, I was very afraid of my dad. He's a very big guy, huge hands, and slap the shit out of me if I talk back or whatever. He took no shit. So me being terrified of my father growing up also made it way easier for him, I guess, to help keep me in order. But when I moved in with my dad, I went from being in resource classes to being in advanced placement classes immediately. I went from being heavily medicated on Wellbutrin, Depakote, Risperidol, Ritalin, and a few others that I cannot recall off the top of my head, but on a heavy cocktail of these multiple times a day, to being on nothing, going home every day, studying, having perfect attendance, playing sports, functioning. And this went on for a while. I stayed with my dad for a while. I felt like this crazy energy building up inside of me, like an outburst was going to happen, like I was going to do something and get in all this trouble. I don't know. I was taking everything I had to, be this perfect kid and not spaz the fuck out, which I was just so good at growing up. And I still, even to this day, I just felt this building up in me, and I ended up going to visit my mom. And when I visited my mom, after being with my dad for about 1 year, my mom had this whole game plan again. I guess she wanted the child support back or what have you, but my mom was like, listen, son, we got this new place that we moved, we got this land, we got whatever. Well, we'll get you a dirt bike. You'll be able to ride around. We'll go do this and this and this together. Finally, I'll do these things with you. We'll give you the master bedroom, and we'll move down on the other side of the house to be close to your little brother. Promise me all these things. I miss you so much. I love you. We can finally be, family, blah, blah, blah. And I just always wanted that attention and that connection with my mom, and I was so desperate for it that I just kind of broke down. And I can't even explain to you the amount of anxiety and stuff that went over me, but I had just called my dad and told him I'm not coming home. I'm going to move back with my mom, blah, blah, blah. My dad's like, listen, just come back, finish out the school year, go on the Christmas break or whatever, finish the semester. Just don't leave in the middle of the year. Think about your grades. My dad was trying to be smart, but I was so baited and hungry for that, motherly connection that I just abandoned everything that was going so well for me and went back with my mom, and immediately my grades went to shit. I started getting in all this trouble. I got so many after school detentions at this place that they carried all the way through the end of the school year until the next school year. So much so that when I took the testing that they had, the state testing, and I tested 10th, 11th grade level when I was in 7th grade, they skipped me 8th grade and put me in 9th grade to get me out of the middle school and into the high school because the teacher hated me. The principal hated me so much because she paddled me nonstop and gave me nonstop detentions. But I got in so much shit out there, and I was in Tennessee in this small, poor fucking town, man, and the kids were fucking brutal, and I didn't fit in with any of the farm kids, any of the goth kids, any of the people out there. I was just this fucking goofy, tall, skinny fucking kid that, was very aloof and fucking funny.
Thanks for checking out the Cliffhanger Podcast. Go to his link tree down below to find links to all his social media and other things. Haven't you always wanted a Cliff Jensen shirt? We have merch. Check out more episodes coming soon from Cliff and his adult entertainment friends.